Okay, so how did you hear about Alex Comfort?
Well, clearly it was Wayne Burns, my teacher. I became a disciple of his, but as an undergrad I was sort of a follower, but not that close to him personally. But then I heard about Alex, and Wayne lent me some books. And one among them was Authority and Delinquency in the Modern State, which I made great impression, and of course Art and Social Responsibility, and the novel, and Our Time. So these were given these to read, and then I returned them in his mailbox for this in the English department, and I really liked them a lot.
Can you say why they were so significant to you? The one on authority and delinquency. What was so
that was especially interesting because I had a strong suspicion that happens a lot. That the people with sadistic tendencies go into authority, and it's not a perfect theory, but there's a lot of examples of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just read this man Harris, who was the British air general in charge of bombing the Germans, that he had an actual taste for sadism. He wanted to kill people. Mm-hmm. And so that's a recent example. And, I actually like to have people in power who are reliable and not like that. But there's unfortunately too many examples of the other.
Did you consider yourself an anarchist when you started reading Alex Comfort, or did you become an anarchist through reading his books?
I don't know if it was quite instantaneous, but it grew. Of course, Wayne was. He was also a pacifist, and he did not serve in World War II. So I served. I was in Korea, but Callahan served in the Navy for many years. He was a part of the followers of Wayne.
Okay, so perhaps you should talk about you as a member of the Burns group. There were other people.
Yeah, the ones that were in Seattle when I was an undergrad from 1954 to 8. I didn't meet Wayne until maybe 55 or early 56, and I was advised by a guy named Frank Ross, a man I knew who had taken Wayne, and that was somebody special in the English department. And so then I started taking him. I became a reader for him at one point, grading some blue books. I got closer and closer to him. I had also had long conversations on the phone. It was partly that he was willing to talk for so long with a student. Most professors were not that way, so they were kind enough and all that, but I got closer to him, and probably closing a gap between my need for a better father and himself. That was a territory that I was sort of aware of, but not adequately. And at one time there was an embarrassment. I returned some of those books by comfort into another professor's box, another man that I knew named Merrill Davis, and he pointed out to me that he got these. And I had a note in there complimenting the books, and I think I sounded much more like a anarchist at that point in those notes than I really felt.
Uh-huh.
But it was an act of enthusiasm. So Merrill Davis was wondering what the hell was going on, I think. But he was a good man. I didn't fear him or anything. But it was a mistake that I don't think I wanted to make. So then later, of course, we learned that Wayne had long ago contacted Alex Comfort because he was looking for a novelist, a writer who was somewhat in the anarchist tradition. And, he had read these novels, which we didn't read. And he wasn't teaching them at the time that I knew him. He never taught any of them. If he had, I would have read some, but he didn't.
So what years are we talking about here now?
Well, 55 to 58, I finished the undergraduate work in spring of 58 and went away to UCLA, where I had no contact with Wayne, but I know by then I was pretty much involved with anarchist thinking. I knew I had already read Kropotkin, quite a bit of him. Proudhon much later. So I knew about him. And there was this book by Woodcock, The History of Anarchism, which has sort of a downside to it, like anarchism has been defeated already. But I didn't pay too much attention to that. I was very interested in this history. And I think it was the only one around at that time. So Woodcock and Wayne had known each other earlier, but they were nowhere near any closeness by the time I got around.
They'd met each other, had they?
Oh yeah, I probably told you, or didn't I? That Wayne told me this anecdote that he was on a little car trip with Woodcock, and they went up to, I think north of Seattle, and they stopped at a place. It was a garage, and Woodcock began talking to the workers there, asking them if they were aware of their anarchist heritage in that location. And Wayne thought, this is awful, he's going to get slugged. But that was one of his stories. You probably know about Woodcock's efforts to work at the University of Washington, where he was banned, he couldn't get in. Yeah. They were willing to try to get him in, but he decided it wasn't worth it.
So he remained a freelance writer then?
Yeah, and up in Vancouver. Because he taught something, I don't know what it was, but this is before my day. But then the chairman in the department named Robert Heilman, who was not an anarchist, but he believed in free thought. He agreed to meet Woodcock at the airplane when it flew in and try to escort him into the country. But Woodcock backed out. He didn't want to come. He'd been banned. He'd been kicked. He'd been stopped once at the border or something, and he thought this isn't worth it. So I never met Woodcock, but I read several of his books. I liked his books, and I still have a few around. There's so many of them, though, that nobody will ever read all of them.
Yeah, but he was the kind of historian of anarchism.
Yeah, but he traveled and he wrote many books. And there's one about British Columbia that I read, and he visited the Doukhobor colonies that existed and found that they had some demagogues sometimes took them over. They were very naive people. They'd get bossed around and told to do sexual things that probably were pretty shameful.
But he related that to anarchism in some way, didn't he?
Well, he was interested in whatever happened to those guys, and so he went and found out. Yeah, there was some. Well, Tolstoy helped settle them up there, so they were beneficiaries. So I got closer and closer to Wayne, and I visited there several times. It was a great treat. I came with my first wife, Esther, and my little baby, who was born in 1958, and it was wonderful to go out there. Yeah, so Wayne definitely was an anarchist and a pacifist and an atheist.